Hey guys, picture this. You open your eyes, and it's the year 476 AD. Rome, the mighty superpower that ruled for centuries, has just collapsed like a badly built IKEA bookshelf. No Netflix, no Wi-Fi, no DoorDash. Just a crumbling empire, political chaos, and a whole lot of people who think bathing is optional. Before we dive into your new, rustic lifestyle, hit that like button if you enjoy traveling through history without the risk of plague, and drop a comment below telling me honestly how long you think you'd last in a world without toilet paper. All right, dim the lights, maybe grab a blanket. This story is better when you feel a little cold and uncomfortable. Ready? Let's step into your brand new old life. You arrive in the world, in a wooden hut with a leaky roof. Your crib is basically a woven basket stuffed with straw that smells suspiciously like goat. Your parents, peasants, farmers, the kind of people who measure wealth not in gold, but in how many turnips they have stored for winter. It's a weird time to be born. Rome has just fallen to the barbarians, which sounds exciting until you realize that means there's no central government, no reliable trade, and no one to stop your neighbor from stealing your chickens. Also, congratulations, you've already got a 50% chance of dying before age 5. Childhood in 476 isn't so much playdates and birthday parties as it is survive the winter and hope you don't catch dysentery. You wake up to the sound of your mother starting a fire and your father sharpening tools. There's no morning coffee. Instead, you drink something called small beer because water is often filthy enough to kill you. Yes, that's right. You're basically starting your day with a mild buzz at age 6. Breakfast is bread. Hard bread. Bread that could double as a weapon. If you're lucky, there's a smear of goat cheese on it. Want to brush your teeth? Cute. People don't do that yet. Your mouth smells like fermented barley and onions. But hey, so does everyone else's. Step outside, and you'll see dirt roads, low wooden houses, and the occasional Roman ruin, crumbling stone walls and half-buried statues, like ghosts of a world that just ended. The air smells of smoke, manure, and the faint tang of iron from the blacksmith's forge. You hear rumors about distant kings, warlords, and strange horsemen from the east. But news travels slower than molasses in January, and most of it is just gossip. In fact, your whole world probably stretches no more than 20 miles in any direction. Travel is dangerous. Strangers are suspicious, and Google Maps won't be invented for, well, over 1,000 years. Your job starts early. At 8 years old, you're herding animals, collecting firewood, or helping in the fields. School? Forget it. Unless you're the child of a noble or a monk, the only letters you'll learn are P for plow and T for tax. Speaking of taxes, even though Rome is gone, some local lord still shows up twice a year to take his share of your crops. No money? No problem, he'll take your chickens instead. And if you complain, well, let's just say the justice system is basically might makes right. Night is dark, really dark. No streetlights, no glow from a phone screen, just the faint flicker of an oil lamp. Shadows move strangely on the walls, and every creak makes you wonder if it's the wind, or a thief, or something worse. You sleep on a straw mattress, probably sharing it with siblings, and possibly fleas. The cold seeps in through the walls, so you huddle under a wool blanket that smells like sheep because it was sheep. If you're lucky, you wake up. If you're not, well, people just quietly disappear in the night sometimes. Wolves, raiders, disease. Nobody writes a missing persons report. This is the beginning of what historians call the Dark Ages. Trade collapses, roads decay, literacy plummets, entire cities shrink or vanish. And while some parts of the old Roman world keep a flicker of culture alive, much of Europe drifts into isolation, superstition, and survival mode. But here's the thing, life goes on. People still laugh, fall in love, tell stories by the fire. They raise kids, plant crops, and celebrate the changing seasons. The world didn't end. It just got smaller, slower, and a lot muddier. By late autumn, the fields are empty and the ground is frozen hard as stone. You and your family huddle in the single warm room of your home, a smoky, dimly lit space that smells like burning peat and unwashed humans. Outside, snow piles against the walls. Inside, food disappears faster than you want to think about. Your winter diet? Stew made from root vegetables, dried beans, and the occasional scrap of salted pork if the rats haven't gotten to it first. Always, one night you wake to the sound of scratching near the food store. You grab a stick and creep forward, only to find two rats staring at you with the bold confidence of creatures who know you won't catch them. Congratulations, you've just learned your place in the winter food chain. Once every few months, a traveler wanders into your village. This time it's a wiry man with a patched cloak, frost on his beard, and a sack of mystery goods. Everyone gathers to hear news. He speaks of far-off wars, strange tribes moving across the land, and a city where people still wear Roman-style togas. It sounds like a fairy tale. Then he pulls out a strange coin gold, heavy, stamped with the face of an emperor you've never heard of. You pass it from hand to hand, marveling at its weight. For a brief moment, you remember that the world is bigger than your muddy little village, and that somewhere out there, wealth and power still exist. It happens suddenly. One afternoon, the dogs start barking, and you see men on horseback at the edge of the fields. They're not traders, they're raiders. Leather armor, rough beards, and a hungry look in their eyes, the kind of men who take what they want. Your family hides in the woods, while your neighbors try to negotiate. The raiders steal sheep, break down doors, and ride away before nightfall. It's over in minutes, but the damage will take months to repair. You've just had your first taste of the reality that in 476, safety is never guaranteed, not even in your own home. You fall ill one spring fever, chills, the whole works. The healer arrives, an old woman with more wrinkles than teeth, in a bag full of mysterious plants. She brews you a drink so bitter you suspect it's just punishment for being sick. Then she burns dried herbs over your head while muttering prayers. Somehow you recover. Was it the herbs, the prayers, or just luck? No one knows. But now you owe her a small bundle of wool in payment. Congratulations, you've just participated in the local healthcare system. The only stone building in your world is the village church, cold, dark, and smelling of candle wax. The priest tells stories about saints, miracles, and heaven, a place far better than here, assuming you follow the rules. You attend Mass mostly because it's one of the few times the entire village gathers in one place. Plus, the bread and watered wine afterward feel like a feast. The church is also your first real glimpse of books thick, handwritten volumes in Latin, a language you'll never understand, but they look magical, like they hold the secrets of the universe. One summer, your father sends you to help the blacksmith. His workshop is a cave of heat and noise, filled with the smell of hot iron and sweat. You pump the bellows, watch molten metal take shape, and feel the strange satisfaction of creating something that will last longer than you will. The blacksmith tells you stories about the days when Roman soldiers marched through with perfect armor and bright swords. Now he makes hoes, nails, and the occasional axe for defense. By the end of the week, your arms ache, but you have a new skill and a healthy fear of touching anything glowing red. One year, the weather turns against you. Spring comes late, summer is cold, and the crops fail. People whisper that it's God's punishment or the work of evil spirits. By autumn, the hunger is sharp and constant. Neighbors vanish in the night, leaving to search for food elsewhere. The weak don't survive the winter. You do barely. And you learn something important. In 476, survival isn't guaranteed by hard work alone. Sometimes the world just doesn't cooperate. Then one evening, something rare happens, Joy. A traveling bard arrives, bringing songs, jokes, and news from faraway lands. He plays under the flickering firelight, telling tales of heroes, lost kingdoms, and battles fought under strange skies. For a few hours, the cold, hunger, and danger fade. The village laughs, sings, and feels alive. The bard leaves the next morning, but his stories stay. And you realize in a time with so little comfort, words can be as valuable as bread. Living in 476 isn't just hard, it's unpredictable. One year, you're harvesting turnips under the sun. The next, you're watching raiders ride away with your food. You measure life not in decades, but in seasons, and every day is a gamble. But somehow life persists. Babies are born, songs are sung, bread is baked, and even in the shadow of Rome's fall, humanity keeps moving forward, one muddy step at a time. So, would you choose to live it if you could? Or is 476 best left as a story told by the fire? You walk the old Roman road. It's cracked and overgrown now, weeds splitting the once perfect stones. Once messengers rode here in a day what now takes you a week. On either side, the land stretches wide and empty fields gone wild, patches of forest where wolves might be watching. The air smells of damp earth and pine. Every so often, you pass the ruins of something that once mattered, a toppled milestone carved with Latin you can't read, or a half-buried arch where ivy has swallowed the stone. You wonder if the road leads somewhere better, or if it's just another way back to where you started. You enter the forest, and the light changes softer, green-tinted, with the sun filtering through leaves. The air here is cooler, and smells of moss and wet bark. It's not peaceful exactly, it's watchful. You can feel unseen eyes on you. Maybe deer, maybe something less friendly. The ground is soft underfoot, but littered with roots that threaten to trip you. Somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker knocks rhythmically on a tree, the sound echoing like a slow drum. Here, the world feels older than Rome, older than the road you came from, as if the forest doesn't care who rules the land, because it's been here long before them and will be here long after. By evening, you spot smoke and follow it to a camp. Traders, 3 men, 1 woman, and 2 tired horses sit around a small fire. Their goods are strange: bundles of fur, glass beads that catch the firelight, a small jar of something that smells sweet. They speak in a mix of languages, tossing words between them like stones in a game. You trade a carved wooden spoon for a dried fish, salted and stiff. The woman hands it to you with a look that says she knows you got the better deal. That night, you share their fire. They tell you of places where the streets are paved, and of others where people live in houses carved into cliffs. You fall asleep wondering if they're telling the truth, or if all traders are part-time liars. On the second day of travel, you find it, a standing stone in the middle of a field. It's taller than 3 men, covered in carvings worn smooth by centuries of rain. Someone, long ago, made this with purpose, but no one alive remembers why. You place your hand on it, and it's cold, even in the sun. The surface is rough, and the grooves form patterns your eyes can't quite follow. You stand there longer than you meant to, until a crow lands on top and caws sharply, as if to tell you to move on. You do. The river is wide, restless, and loud, constant tumbling of water over stone. The air smells fresh here, cleaner than in the village. You strip off your tunic and wade in, the cold hitting like a shock. The current pushes at your legs, playful but insistent. There are fish flashing silver under the surface, too quick to catch. You scoop water into your hands and drink, risky, yes, but worth it. It tastes like nothing, which in this world means it's safe. By the time you step back onto the bank, your skin tingles, and for a brief moment, you feel clean. On a hill above the river stands an old watchtower. The wood of its door is rotted, and ivy climbs halfway up the walls. Inside, the air smells of dust and damp. Your footsteps echo as you climb the spiral stairs, each one worn in the middle from years of soldiers' boots, soldiers long gone. At the top, the view is endless. Forest, river, and far in the distance, smoke from a settlement you've never visited. You imagine what it was like when the tower was new, when someone stood here scanning for enemies. Now it's just you, and you realize you've been alone up here long enough for the sun to start slipping down. Time to move. It happens on the road back, a man in a hood, walking with a limp. He carries a bundle on his back and doesn't speak at first. When he does, his voice is quiet. He asks for water. You give him what little you have left. In return, he hands you something small, a carved bone charm in the shape of a bird. For luck, he says, and walks on without another word. You're not sure if you feel safer with it, or more aware that you might need it. That night, the sky is black, not dark blue, not cloud-covered, just black. No moon, no stars. Even the crickets seem to pause. You sit by your small fire, its glow barely pushing back the darkness. Shapes seem to move beyond the light. Every sound, a twig snapping, leaves rustling, feels too close. You tell yourself it's just animals. You hope it's just animals. When the wind picks up, the fire flickers, and you realize how thin the line is between safety and the void beyond it. After days away, your village feels both familiar and smaller than before. The same crooked fence, the same muddy paths, the same people doing the same chores. You tell your family about the traders, the tower, the stranger. They listen, but the way they nod makes you think they're already turning it into something else. A story they'll tell, shaped to fit their own fears and hopes. And maybe that's how history works here. Not written in books, but carried in the mouths of those who live it. It starts with rain soft at first, then endless. Days of it. The river swells, faster and angrier with each passing night. One morning, you wake to the sound of water where it shouldn't be. It's at your doorstep, brown and swirling, carrying branches, clumps of grass, and a chicken that looks just as unhappy as you are. People rush to save what they can, barrels, tools, sacks of grain. You help drag a sheep to higher ground, while the younger children cry at the sight of the fields disappearing under the flood. By the time the rain stops, half the village is mud and debris. But you're alive, and in this year, that counts as a win. Weeks later, a monk passes through, his robe patched, sandals worn thin. He carries a satchel of parchment and ink, and when he opens it, the village gathers like moths to a flame. He writes names, blessings, bits of scripture in a hand so beautiful it feels like magic. You've never seen anyone turn sound into symbols so easily. When you ask how, he smiles. Letters are seeds. Plant them well, and they grow forever. You think about that for days afterward, wondering what your life would look like if you could plant such seeds. Once a year, people from miles around gather in the next valley for the summer fair. It's the busiest place you've ever seen stalls, with colored cloth, smoked meat, metal tools, and clay jugs painted with swirling patterns. Jugglers toss knives. A bear dances to the beat of a drum. Children stare wide-eyed at a man selling bright powders that turn fire green when thrown in. You trade a bundle of wool for a small copper brooch shaped like a spiral. It feels heavy with meaning, though you're not sure why. The walk home is long, but your mind is lit with the sense that the world, for all its danger, can also be dazzling. The year turns against you again. This time, the rain never comes. The soil cracks. The grass goes yellow. You watch your father's face as he counts the stored grain. Even if nothing goes wrong, it won't be enough, and things always go wrong. The well runs low, water is rationed. People start whispering about leaving. But where? The air is heavy with dust, and every step stirs it up. The land feels brittle, like it could break underfoot. In desperate times, trade doesn't stop, it changes. One night, you're taken to a secret market deep in the woods. Torches burn low to hide the gathering from raiders or greedy lords. People bring goods wrapped in cloth grain, salt, herbs, even small metal knives. Deals are struck with nods and whispered promises. You see coins, yes, but also barter a goat for 2 sacks of barley, a blanket for a jar of honey. You leave with a small bag of dried apples. It's not much, but in a lean year, it feels like treasure. Your sister gives birth in the middle of winter. The fire is stoked high, the air thick with the smell of herbs the healer burns. When the baby cries for the first time, it's sharp and alive, a small miracle. Everyone knows how fragile new life is here, but for now the child is breathing, the mother is smiling, and there's a rare warmth in the room that isn't just from the fire. One evening, a man with a weathered face arrives at the village asking for shelter. Over a shared pot of stew, he tells a story of a city far to the south where the streets are still lined with marble, where people read from scrolls and argue about philosophy in public squares. It sounds impossible, like something from the Bard songs, but the way he speaks, steady and certain, makes you wonder if maybe, just maybe, such places still exist. Hunger drives you into the forest with three others. You carry a spear, awkward and heavy, its tip glinting in the pale winter sun. Hours pass with nothing but silence. Then movement. A deer. The chase is sudden and breathless. Your feet slipping on ice, heart pounding so loud it drowns out the world. You don't make the kill, but someone does. And that night you eat meat roasted over an open flame, the fat sizzling and dripping into the fire. It's the best thing you've tasted all year. It comes without warning. One morning, the world is white. The village is quiet in that way snow brings footsteps muffled, voices soft. You breathe in the cold, sharp air and watch flakes land on your sleeve. Each one different, each one vanishing in seconds. It's beautiful and fleeting, and for a moment you forget the hunger, the danger, the uncertainty. The world feels still. Imagine your first memory as a child, the distant, hollow sound of bells tolling in a city that no longer feels alive. You are only 3 years old, but even then you sense the weight of something ending. The grown-ups speak in whispers, their words carrying an unease you cannot yet understand. Traders who once brought silk from the east and spices from far-off lands no longer come. The roads, once patrolled by soldiers in glinting armor, are empty except for stray dogs and weeds pushing up between the stones. By the time you are 6, you have learned that Rome, once the heart of the world, has fallen. To you, it is not a dramatic event marked by a single day, but rather a long, slow fading of the light. The grand marble forum in your nearest town is now a meeting place for goats and gossip. The statues are still there, but their faces are chipped, their noses broken, their eyes clouded by dust and ivy. People no longer speak of emperors. They speak of local warlords and bishops, men whose power comes not from law, but from the loyalty of swords. Your childhood is shaped not by the glories of the old empire, but by the struggle to hold on to scraps of its memory. The elders sometimes tell you of hot baths with running water, of amphitheaters filled with music and games. But these stories sound to you like fairy tales. How could water flow from walls? How could light fill the streets at night without fire? In your small village, life moves to a different rhythm. You wake before the sun because the cockerel demands it, and your family's day is measured by the toll of the church bell, rather than the precision of Roman sundials. Your father works the same plot of land his father worked, and you, even as a child, learn to help, collecting firewood, herding goats, carrying buckets of water from the well. The year 476 has left more than political ruin. It has left silence. The hum of trade, the chatter of travelers, the clang of the blacksmith making swords for distant legions, all gone. In their place comes a slow creak of wooden wheels on muddy roads, the muffled footfalls of monks in brown robes walking to the monastery. The old Roman roads still stretch across the land like veins, but they no longer carry the lifeblood of an empire. Only wandering peddlers, beggars, and sometimes dark-eyed strangers, whose intentions are never clear. You begin to notice how different generations carry the fall of Rome in their hearts. The old ones still dream of the empire's return. The middle-aged speak only of survival. And your generation, the children, grow up without expecting that anything grand will come again. But there is something else stirring in this new quiet world. Monasteries begin to collect books, carefully copying the words of long-dead Roman thinkers onto parchment, locking them away in wooden chests. You do not yet know it, but you are living in a time when knowledge is being hidden like a treasure for the future. A monk once lets you peek inside the scriptorium, and you see rows of books, strange objects smelling of ink and leather, their pages covered in beautiful marks you cannot yet read. To your young mind, it feels like peering into a room of spells. As you grow older, the world seems smaller. The great cities crumble, the roads crack, and the sea feels more dangerous. Raiders from across the water sometimes strike the coastal villages, burning homes and taking what they wish. In these moments, the fragility of your existence is clear. There are no legions coming to protect you, no imperial decree to stop the chaos. You belong to a world where safety is a matter of how well your village can hide itself, or how much your lord's men can intimidate an enemy. Yet in this fragile world, there is a strange beauty. Without the noise of empire, you hear the wind through the wheat fields, the quiet splash of the river at dawn, the whisper of prayers in a candlelit chapel. The nights are dark, so dark you can see the Milky Way spread across the sky like a path to somewhere better. And though you know Rome has fallen, you also know life continues, stubborn and unbroken. The year 476 is no longer just the year of your birth. It becomes a mark, a dividing line. Those before you lived in the shadow of an empire. You live in the dawn of something uncertain, something smaller, slower, but still alive. You cannot yet know it, but your lifetime will be one of preservation, of stories, of seeds, of songs, so that the world can one day awaken again. You are a child of a city that once called itself the heart of the world, but in this year, the heart beats faintly. The marble streets that emperors once paraded down are chipped and cracked. The aqueduct that used to sing with rushing water now only gurgles when the rain is heavy. And yet for you, this is not ruin. This is simply home. Your mornings begin not with the trumpet of imperial guard or the bustle of merchants from the far corners of the empire, but with the bray of a neighbor's donkey. The air smells of damp earth and smoke from hearth fires. Your mother shakes you awake while the sun is still just a pale suggestion on the horizon. She tells you to gather sticks for the cooking fire before the market bell rings, if there is still a market today. Some mornings there isn't. On the streets, you pass men huddled in corners, wrapped in cloaks too thin for the season. They speak in hushed Latin, though sometimes you hear strange words from the north, the language of the soldiers who have taken the city but never truly claimed it. You've learned to understand a few of their rough phrases, not out of courtesy, but because not knowing can be dangerous. At the old forum, weeds curl between the paving stones. A tattered awning flaps in the wind over a lone stall where a woman sells coarse bread and jars of honey. She was once the wife of a merchant who imported silk, though she rarely speaks of him now. You've heard whispers. He left for Constantinople and never returned. There is a tension in the air, invisible but constant. It's in the way people glance over their shoulders, the way conversations stop when the tall men in furs and iron pass by, their swords clinking at their sides. It's in the silence that follows the cry of a crow in the empty forum. By midday, the sun sits heavy in the sky, and you help your mother tend the small garden outside your crumbling home. The soil here is stubborn, thin, but the beans cling to life. She tells you stories of the Rome she knew as a girl, how the streets glowed with oil lamps, how ships lined the Tiber with goods from Egypt, Gaul, and beyond. She talks as though she is remembering a dream she's not entirely sure was real. Sometimes in the late afternoon, you venture beyond the old gates. The countryside stretches out in wild, untended fields, dotted with half-collapsed villas. In one of them, ivy has swallowed the walls completely, and you can still see faint murals of blue seas and painted gods on the plaster. You imagine the laughter of banquets echoing through the empty rooms, the clink of goblets, the hum of conversation, now replaced by the wind's low whistle through the ruins. The elders say the world is not dead, only sleeping, that what has been lost can be found again. But when you look around, it feels less like a slumber and more like the long fading of a fire, warmth still lingering, but each day a little dimmer. Yet on some nights when the moon climbs high and the city is quiet, you stand by the remains of the old aqueduct and listen to the distant crash of the river against its stones. You wonder if there will come a time when it runs full again, when Rome, or whatever grows in its place, will rise stronger than before. You are too young to know the answer, but old enough to feel the weight of the question pressing into your bones. The sun hung low over the crumbling horizon of the Western Roman world, casting a dim golden light on streets that once bustled with merchants, legionaries, and senators. By 476, those streets were quieter, not entirely empty, but filled with a different kind of sound. Gone was the sharp clink of armor and the loud bark of commands. In its place came the hum of barter, the shuffle of worn sandals on cracked stones, and the distant creak of wooden cartwheels carrying goods to markets that now sold more coarse cloth than fine silks. You, born in this year of endings, would come into a world straddling two realities, one foot in the grandeur of the Roman legacy, the other sinking into the uncertainty of what would follow. As an infant, you would not understand that the emperor in Rome, Romulus Augustulus, had just been deposed. But the grown-ups around you would feel it. Some would speak in hushed voices, convinced the old empire might yet rise. Others would shake their heads, certain that a long night was falling. The city around you, whether it was Ravenna, Rome, or some far-off provincial town, still bore the bones of an age of greatness. The aqueducts still carried water, though some had cracks where grass sprouted. The bathhouses still stood, but their marble floors were cold from disuse. Great basilicas, built for the glory of both gods and emperors, still reached skyward, but fewer worshippers filled them now, and the oil lamps burned less often. As you grew, the changes would not come like a sudden storm, but like a slow tide. Coins would become rarer, and merchants would prefer barter, perhaps a sack of grain for a pair of shoes, or a basket of olives for a woolen tunic. Schools would shrink. The educated voices that once filled the air with Greek and Latin philosophy would fade, replaced by the practical talk of farmers, soldiers, and artisans. In your childhood, you might wander beyond the city walls. Outside lay villages with thatched roofs, farms that still tilled the same soil as in Caesar's day, and forests creeping ever closer to abandoned estates. There was a strange beauty in it, wildflowers overtaking marble steps, birds nesting in crumbling towers. To you, it might not feel like loss, it might feel like the way things were meant to be. By your teenage years, the roads would still stretch far, but fewer travelers came. The old imperial couriers, who once galloped with messages across the empire, were replaced by slower, local riders, if any at all. News traveled more by rumor than by scroll. A battle in Gaul, a skirmish in Hispania, the rise of a new chieftain in the north. These stories came pieced together, like a tapestry woven from frayed threads. Yet life was not only decline. In this quieting world, new traditions began to take root. Germanic kings ruling from former Roman cities brought their own customs. Markets were held beneath wooden halls instead of stone forms. Feast days and festivals became simpler, but also more personal. Villages gathering around great fires to share stories, roast meat, and drink. Christianity, now firmly established, filled the air with hymns in Latin, binding together people of many tongues. And you, born into the year when Rome's shadow began to stretch into the medieval dawn, would grow into someone neither wholly Roman nor wholly barbarian. You might wear a Roman-style tunic, but fasten it with a Germanic brooch. You might eat bread baked in the Roman fashion, but wash it down with mead brewed from a northern recipe. The old world slept, yes, but while it dreamed, something new was beginning to stir. The seasons rolled on, and you began to notice how the land itself seemed to breathe differently here. Spring was not a sudden burst of green like in modern gardens. It was a slow, almost shy awakening. The frost loosened its grip on the earth grain by grain, streams murmured a little louder, and tiny yellow flowers peeked from cracks in the stone walls like cautious children. The villagers treated this change as something sacred. Each day, an old woman with hands like twisted roots walked through the fields scattering crushed herbs, muttering to the air in a language you did not know. She said the earth was sleeping, and she was whispering it awake. Your mornings had become quiet rituals. You would rise before the others, pulling on a rough wool tunic, still smelling faintly of the smoke from last night's fire, and step outside into the mist. The village seemed different at this hour, empty lanes lined with crooked fences, the sharp scent of damp earth, the faint bleating of a goat somewhere unseen. Sometimes a farmer would pass with a wooden yoke over his shoulders, carrying pails of water that splashed against his boots. No one hurried here. Time itself seemed unbothered by urgency. The slow pace of life meant you began to notice details you'd have missed in your own century. How bread dough rose beside the hearth, swelling slowly as the hours passed. How the smith's hammering rang like a heartbeat across the valley, not constant, but steady. each strike followed by a pause, as though he were listening to the metal breathe before shaping it again. How laughter in the tavern came in deep boom bursts, followed by long silences filled only with the clink of clay mugs. Yet beneath the calm, the shadow of change still lingered. Travelers from distant lands brought strange news. The old Roman roads crumbling without upkeep, great libraries abandoned to dust, cities shrinking into little more than market towns. To the villagers, Rome was a ghost, something half-believed, like the tales of gods who once walked among men. To you, it was the recent past, but here it was already fading into legend. One afternoon, you accompanied a group of hunters into the forest. They carried simple spears and bows, but they moved with the patience of people who had lived among the trees all their lives. The forest was a cathedral of green and gold light, the air thick with the smell of pine and damp leaves. At one point, you passed the moss-covered ruins of an old Roman watchtower. Its stones were cracked and swallowed by ivy, yet the archway still stood, stubborn against centuries of rain and frost. One of the hunters spat on the ground and muttered, "The old ones thought their walls would last forever." No one replied. The silence was heavier than the mist. That night, back in the village, the sky stretched black and endless above you. Without the haze of modern light, the stars looked close enough to touch. A few of the older men pointed out constellations you recognize, but they told different stories. Tales of warriors who had chased stags into the heavens, or of lovers turned to light so they could meet across the sky. You realized these were the same stars the Romans had once gazed upon, the same stars people had feared, worshipped, or used to guide ships across dark seas. And here they still were, eternal and patient, watching the world change below. The night was heavy with the scent of damp earth, and the flicker of your small oil lamp painted trembling shadows along the timber walls. You could hear your mother moving quietly in the adjoining room, the soft rustle of cloth, the faint splash of water into a wooden basin. The day had been long, but not in the way of hurried markets or crowded streets. Life now moved differently. It was measured in the slow turning of seasons, the creak of the wind in the rafters, and the way the sun slipped lazily over the hills before vanishing behind the forest. You pulled your rough wool blanket closer, its coarse fibers scratching against your skin, yet carrying the comforting weight of safety. Outside, a lone owl called from somewhere deep among the pines. The air was cooler now, carrying with it the damp promise of morning mist. You could almost picture it, the way the fog would settle low over the meadow, swallowing the world in a soft gray silence until the sun rose to burn it away. Earlier that day, you had gone with your father to the edge of the river. He had been teaching you how to set a fishing line, not with the fine tools of Rome's merchants, those were long gone, but with a curved bone hook he had carved himself, and a length of flax cord spun by your aunt's patient hands. The river's current was gentle, and you had sat together on the mossy bank, watching silver ripples break around the stones. A heron stood motionless in the shallows, its pale feathers catching the light like old silver coins. Your father had spoken little, but you had felt the quiet bond between you in the way he passed the hook to your small fingers, in the nod of approval when you tied the knot just right. The old story said that once in the days before the empire crumbled, the river had carried barges heavy with grain and wine, their sails flashing in the sun. Now it carried only the reflection of clouds and the occasional driftwood, its surface undisturbed by the clamor of distant cities. As you lie in bed now, you remember the walk back. The path wound through the wildflowers, and the late summer air buzzed with crickets. You had seen the ruins again, the old stone archway, half hidden by ivy, its carvings worn down until the faces of its marble gods were little more than ghostly outlines. Your father said they were from the time when the road beneath your feet led all the way to the heart of Rome itself. Now it led only to the quiet village, its houses huddled together like sleepers sharing warmth. Your grandmother had been sitting by the hearth when you returned, her gnarled hands busy with a spindle. The firelight had deepened the lines of her face, each one etched by winters and memories stretching further back than you could imagine. She told you that when she was a girl, soldiers in shining armor had still marched through these valleys. They had carried the banners of the Western Empire, but their eyes, she said, already looked eastward, toward Constantinople, as if they knew the West was fading. You wonder, as you drift deeper into the night, if anyone still sings the songs they once sang in Rome's great squares. Perhaps they do, somewhere far away, under stars you will never see. For now your own world is smaller, but no less full. It is made of the smell of baking bread in the morning, the sound of rain tapping against the shutters, the feel of soil under your nails when you help plant the barley. Tomorrow, your father says, you will go into the forest to gather resin for the lamps. The path is narrow there, and the air thick with the scent of pine and moss. Somewhere in the shadows, wild boars root through the undergrowth, and foxes slip silently between the trees. He says you must walk softly, for the forest has a memory, and it listens to those who enter. The thought makes your eyes grow heavy. The lamp's flame dances slower, until it is little more than a golden breath in the darkness. The world outside your door may be vast and uncertain, but here, in the year 476, it is quiet. It is safe. And in that silence, you drift, one heartbeat at a time, toward sleep. The first light of dawn seeped through the cracks in the wooden shutters, painting faint golden stripes across the small clay walls of your home. Outside, the air was heavy with mist. Every branch of the bare walnut tree in the yard dripped with beads of water. You could hear the distant thud of an axe. Someone in the village was already cutting firewood for the day. The smell of damp earth drifted in through the door, mingling with the warm scent of last night's embers, still glowing faintly in the hearth. You pulled your wool cloak tighter, the coarse fibers rough against your neck, and stepped outside. The road, if you could call it that, was nothing more than packed dirt with deep ruts carved by wagon wheels long ago. A raven sat on the fence post, its black eyes following your every step. The old market square, once filled with traders and the bright colors of fabrics, now stood almost silent. A single woman with a basket of dried apples sat on a stone, her eyes hollow and tired. You remember the stories of how, before the empire fell, merchants came from faraway lands, bringing pepper from India, glass from Egypt, silk from the east. Now the stalls stood like abandoned skeletons, their roofs sagging and cloth torn by the wind. You walked past the fountain at the center, its stone cracked and moss-covered. The water still trickled faintly, but no coins glittered in its depths anymore. Wishes, it seemed, had become too expensive. As you headed toward the edge of the village, you spotted a lone rider approaching. His horse was thin, its ribs showing, and his cloak was splattered with mud. The man's face was shadowed beneath his hood, but you could tell by the seal dangling from his belt that he was a royal messenger, one of the few still loyal to the crumbling chain of command. When he passed, he gave no greeting, only a slow, measuring glance, as if he were deciding whether you were worth remembering. His saddlebag bulged with scrolls. Were they orders from the new barbarian king? Or desperate pleas from some forgotten Roman general clinging to hope? You would never know. Messengers did not speak unless ordered to. A few miles outside the village stood the ruins of an old Roman watchtower. The path to it was overgrown, the stones half buried in moss. You climbed the crumbling steps, your boots slipping on wet leaves, until you reached the top. From here, the land stretched far in every direction, rolling hills, patches of forest, a silver ribbon of river cutting through the valley. The wind was cold, carrying the smell of smoke from somewhere far away. You placed a hand on the weathered stone wall, tracing the grooves where some long-forgotten soldier had carved his initials. You could almost hear the echo of boots, the clink of armor, the watchman's low voice calling out into the night. But those voices had faded. Only the wind remained. By the time you returned, the sky had turned the color of bruised plum, and smoke rose from the chimneys of the village. Inside your home, the fire crackled softly. You sat on a low stool, untying your worn boots, while the shadows in the room deepened. The wooden beams above groaned softly in the cold. Outside, an owl called from the walnut tree. As you closed your eyes, you thought of the world beyond, the abandoned cities, the empty roads, the forgotten glory of Rome. Somewhere out there, history was shifting quietly in the dark. The air is cool enough to make you draw the cloak closer to your neck, though the wool is scratchy against your skin. A faint mist hangs over the riverbank, turning the world into a pale watercolor painting. You can hear the soft ripple of water over stones, and somewhere beyond the reeds, the cry of a heron echoes like a single note in an empty hall. You kneel by the river to wash your face, the water biting cold, sending a shiver down your spine. The fishmonger's boat drifts past, its hull brushing the shallows, a faint creak of wet wood and the smell of fresh-caught eels trailing behind. He lifts a hand in greeting, eyes still heavy with sleep, before vanishing around the bend. The road into the village is nothing more than packed earth, worn with cart ruts and dotted with puddles from last night's rain. You pause at the cobbler's workshop, its small door propped open with a stone. Inside, the smell of tanned leather mixes with wood smoke. Oh, the cobbler himself sits bent over a shoe, the thread pulled tight in his weathered hands. He doesn't speak, but he hums under his breath a tune older than the village, older perhaps than the empire itself. His workbench is lit only by a square of sunlight, which falls on a row of tiny shoes meant for a child who hasn't yet learned to walk. By midday, the sky is pale blue, with thin clouds drifting like worn parchment. You take the north path, a narrow ribbon between hedgerows heavy with berries. The road is empty except for a shepherd leading a dozen sheep. They move as a single slow tide, hooves tapping softly on the earth. When he passes, the shepherd gives a nod and says nothing. Words are rare here, traded like coins only when needed. Beyond him, the land opens into rolling fields dotted with the skeletal remains of Roman villas, their columns standing like tired sentinels in the grass. You climb the hill to where an old Roman watchtower still stands, though its stones are cracked and covered with ivy. The wind moves through the gaps in the wall, whistling like a quiet flute. Inside, the floor is littered with fallen tiles and dry leaves. For a moment, you stand at the window, looking down at the world below the fields, the faint line of the river, the distant smoke curling from the village. Once this tower would have seen the banners of the legions pass by. Now only crows perch on its highest stones, their calls sounding far too loud in the emptiness. The first snow didn't announce itself with blizzards or gusts of wind. It came like a shy guest, drifting down in delicate flakes that settled on the thatch of roofs and clung to the cloaks of villagers as they hurried to bring the last firewood indoors. You stood at the edge of the settlement, watching the white powder blur the outlines of the hills. Somewhere beyond those hills lay Rome, or rather, what was left of it. The grown-ups still spoke of it as if it were a sleeping giant, but you were starting to understand that giants don't just sleep. Sometimes they fall, and the world keeps walking without them. A shepherd passed by, nodding in greeting, his sheep huddled close against the wind. In the distance, the old road, the Roman road, paved and proud, stretched away like a memory that nobody dared to follow in winter. You pulled your cloak tighter. This was your first winter in a world without Rome. That night, the whole family gathered by the hearth. The fire snapped and sighed, casting a warm orange glow over the rough wooden walls. Shadows wavered and danced on the beams above. Your grandmother leaned forward, her voice low. She told the story of the last Roman messenger who had passed through your valley years ago. He wore a red cloak, she said, and carried orders sealed in wax. But the orders had been for a governor who no longer ruled, in a city that no longer listened. Where did he go? You asked. North, she whispered, eyes glinting. To find someone still in charge, but the North swallows men whole. Your uncle stirred the fire. Sparks leapt up like tiny spirits and vanished into the dark. You wondered if the messenger's ghost now wandered those frozen roads. The next day, you crept into the blacksmith's shed. The air inside was heavy with the scent of iron and charcoal. Old Brennus, the blacksmith, had been a soldier once or so, he claimed, when he was in the mood to talk. On his workbench lay something covered with a piece of cloth. When you asked about it, he narrowed his eyes. Then slowly he lifted the cloth to reveal a gladius short, broad-bladed, and still sharp despite its age. This, he said, running a hand over the hilt, was my father's. He fought for the empire, not this empire, the real one. The sword caught the light like a shard of the sun. For a moment, you could almost hear marching feet, the clash of shields, the heartbeat of a city that once ruled the known world. Then Brennus wrapped it up again, as if tucking it into a bed. "You don't take a sword into a sleeping world," he muttered. "You wake it up, and it might not like what it sees." Weeks later, when the snow began to thin, you went to the winter market in a nearby village. The air smelled of roasting chestnuts and pine smoke. Stalls were crowded with traders selling everything from rough-woven cloaks to honey in clay pots. One merchant sold strange coins, heavy, gold, stamped with the faces of men you didn't recognize. "They were emperors," the merchant said when you asked. "Great men, all dead now." He laughed softly, not unkindly. Their faces outlasted them, though. That's something. In another stall, you found a jar filled with dark ink from the south. The seller whispered that it was the same ink scribes had once used in Roman courts. No one in your village could read the old language anymore. You wondered if the ink now waited in vain for words it would never meet. You remember it as if it were a dream. The air that morning was heavy and still, as if the city itself held its breath. From the narrow window of your family's cramped room above the baker's shop, you could see the old Roman eagle standard swaying in the breeze atop the governor's hall. It had been there your whole life, gleaming gold against the pale sky, a reminder that the empire's hand still stretched, even this far. But today, men in unfamiliar armor approached the square. They moved slowly, deliberately, their boots clinking on the cobblestones. They carried no Roman eagles, only tattered banners of deep green, stitched with strange beasts. You leaned out, just enough to catch sight of one of them, tall, broad-shouldered, his hair unshorn and tangled, his eyes scanning the streets as though he already owned them. By midday, the eagle standard was gone. No horn sounded, no speech was given, just a quiet moment when the last of the empire slipped away without ceremony. You didn't understand the weight of it then, but you felt the change in the air. It was colder somehow, even though the sun still shone. The next morning, the market was quieter than usual. The bread sellers still hawked their loaves, the fishmongers still shouted about the morning catch, but their voices lacked the easy rhythm you knew so well. You wandered past stalls draped with faded cloths, noticing how people huddled close to speak, glancing over their shoulders before saying a word. There were rumors now, about new taxes, about missing caravans, about strange riders seen along the roads at night. The woman who sold figs from the corner stand slipped you one without asking for payment, her eyes darting toward the soldiers at the far end of the square. You chewed it slowly, tasting not only the sweetness of the fruit, but also the uncertainty clinging to the air like a fine dust. That evening, you escaped to the riverbank. The water here always smelled faintly of wild mint, and the reeds whispered in the breeze like an old friend telling secrets. You skipped stones until your arm ached, watching the ripples spread and fade. Downstream, you spotted a barge with a patched sail, its deck piled high with bundles. It moved silently, oars dipping in perfect rhythm, and the figures aboard kept their hoods drawn low. When they passed, you caught a flash of something. Bronze coins spilling from a torn sack, glinting briefly before disappearing again. You wondered where they had come from. You wondered even more where they were going. Weeks later, you set out along the old road toward the hills, carrying a satchel of bread and cheese. The milestones along the path were cracked, their Latin inscriptions worn smooth by centuries of rain. Once this road would have been busy with merchants, soldiers, and travelers. Now the only company you found was a lone raven circling overhead and the occasional rustle in the grass. The silence was so deep you could hear your own heartbeat, a strange, steady drum inside your chest. You walked on, knowing that the world beyond these hills had changed, though you didn't yet know how much. Somewhere far from here, a new chapter of history was beginning. But for now, you were still in the quiet between heartbeats, the pause before the next age truly began. The morning mist clung to the earth like an old wool blanket, muffling every sound. You were walking the narrow path between the blackened tree trunks when you saw it, a single lantern swaying ahead. Its light was faint, but too steady to be windblown. No one carried it, yet it bobbed as if held by invisible hands. You followed, drawn forward, until the path bent sharply. The lantern stopped. The fog around it thickened, forming the vague shape of a cloaked figure. And then, without a sound, it vanished. Only the wet smell of moss and something faintly metallic lingered. Why had it been there? And why did you feel as if you had arrived too late for something? Back in the village, the tavern door swung open on its own. The place was empty except for a single chair by the hearth, pulled out as though waiting for someone to sit. On the table beside it sat a cup of wine still warm. You looked toward the innkeeper's counter, but no one stood there. The fire popped softly, sending sparks up the chimney. You felt a tug, almost like a whisper in the back of your mind, urging you to sit in that chair. But the moment you stepped closer, the cup tipped over, spilling deep red liquid across the table, pooling in patterns like strange letters. You had the oddest sense that they were a warning. Why would someone leave a warm drink for a stranger? And why did the stain on the table look exactly like a map you'd once seen in a crumbling Roman scroll? The village chapel was old, built from Roman stones, scavenged long ago. Its bell tower was leaning slightly, as though tired of holding its weight against the wind. Tonight you passed it in the moonlight and noticed the bell swinging gently, though no wind stirred the air. You stepped inside, the wooden floor groaning under your boots. A cold draft wound its way around your ankles, and there, beside the altar, a small brass key lay on the floor. It was carved with a symbol you didn't recognize, two concentric circles, crossed by a single, jagged line. When you touched it, the bell above you stopped swinging instantly. The silence was sudden, heavy, almost accusing. Why was the key here, and who or what had wanted you to find it? By the next evening, your path led you past the edge of the forest. There, in the fading gold of sunset, stood a stranger in a dark tunic, his hood shadowing his face. He was holding a rolled parchment, but he didn't offer it. Instead, he asked you a question in a low, deliberate voice. Do you know why they hid the roads? Before you could answer, he stepped backward into the shadow of a tree and was gone, leaving only the faint scent of smoke and old leather. You turned to look behind you, and for the first time you realized the old Roman road you had been walking on was vanishing into the earth, the stones sinking slowly as if swallowed by time itself. The cottage roof moaned in the night wind, a slow, aching sound, as if the wood itself remembered something it dared not speak. You lay beneath it, curled under a heavy wool blanket, listening to the hearth's embers sigh. Somewhere above, a faint tap-tap drifted through the rafters. Not the skitter of a mouse, not the scratch of a branch, slower, more deliberate, as if something was counting. You held your breath, one tap, then another, and then silence, the kind that presses against the ears. Why would anyone be on your roof at this hour? The next morning, frost clung to the fence rails, glittering under a pale sun. Down the path by the broken gate, a man stood watching the cottage. His cloak was too fine for this village, deep red, the color of wine, with a clasp shaped like a wolf's head. You had never seen him before, but his eyes seemed to have been watching for much longer than just today. Oh, when you blinked, he was gone. No footprints in the frost, no sound of retreating steps, only the faint smell of smoke, though no fires burned nearby. Why had he come here? Later, while fetching water from the stream, you noticed a wicker basket resting beside the bucket. It hadn't been there when you left. Inside was a folded scrap of parchment, rough-edged, tied with a thin strip of leather. You glanced around, no one in sight. Your fingers hesitated on the knot, but curiosity pulled stronger than caution. The parchment was blank. Only when you turned it toward the sunlight did a faint brownish script shimmer across the surface. Letters not in Latin, not in Greek, not in anything you had ever seen. Why would someone leave this for you? That evening, Just as the sun sank, you heard bells. Not the deep, solid toll of the village church, but a lighter, almost playful chime, carried faintly through the bare trees. The strange thing, there were no bells in this part of the valley. The sound drew you toward the edge of the woods. Shadows lengthened. The wind whispered, and still the chimes played, as though beckoning. You stepped onto the forest path, the world behind you dimming. The moment you crossed beneath the first arch of branches, the sound stopped. Why had they been calling you? The fields lay brittle and pale under a weak winter sun, the stubble of last harvest poking through thin snow. You were halfway across the footpath when you saw her, a small girl in a linen shift, barefoot, hair tangled like riverweed. She stood in the middle of the field, watching you. Her lips moved. No sound came. You cupped a hand to your ear, taking a step closer. She lifted her hand and pointed, not at you, but at the hills beyond the village, the ones the elders warned against crossing. When you blinked, she was gone. Only the snow showed a single set of prints, leading toward those forbidden hills. Why had she pointed there? That night from your window, you saw an orange flicker deep among the trees. A fire. The elders always said no one hunted this late in winter. It wasn't worth the risk of wolves. And yet, there it was, steady and bright. You pulled your cloak around your shoulders and stepped outside. The snow crunched underfoot, your breath clouding the air. But when you reached the first line of trees, the fire vanished. Not faded, vanished. In its place, the snow was warm, as though something had been standing there only moments before. Why had it left so quickly? The following morning, while splitting kindling, you heard it, your own name, spoken low and slow, as if it had been dragged across the ground before reaching your ears. You turned sharply. No one there. The air was still. It came again, this time from behind you, the same voice, the same dragging tone. You spun around, nothing but the woodpile. But in the split log at your feet, the grain twisted strangely, as if the rings formed shapes. Letters. And those letters spelled your name. Why was it written there? An old merchant came to the village that day, his cart piled with cloth, salt, and trinkets. You lingered by his stall until he unrolled a brittle parchment map to show a farmer the trade roads. Your eyes caught a blank patch where the hills lay, the same ones the barefoot girl had pointed toward. No rivers, no paths, no villages, just emptiness, as though the place had been scraped away. You touched the map. The merchant slapped your hand away sharply. Best you never go there, he muttered. Best you never ask why. The rain had stopped hours ago, but droplets still clung to the wooden eaves, falling one by one into the mud with a soft pat, pat, pat. You're lying awake on your straw bed, not because of the cold. It's warmer tonight than it has been in weeks, but because of the silence. The village dogs aren't barking. No carts rumble along the dirt road. Even the wind, usually restless at night, feels like it has gone to sleep. You sit up listening, the flicker of your small oil lamp throwing long shadows across the room. The hearth is dark. You'd let the fire die earlier, thinking the night would be peaceful. And yet, this quiet feels wrong. You step outside, the wooden door creaking louder than it should in the stillness. The moon hangs low, pale and heavy behind a thin veil of clouds. The cobblestone lane stretches ahead, empty. You pass your neighbor's hut, the one where the old potter works late into the night, and notice the door is slightly ajar. Why would he leave it open? He's always the cautious sort. You call his name, softly at first, then louder. No answer. Inside, the hearth is still warm, tools scattered on the table, a half-finished jug sitting on the wheel, as if he just stepped away for a moment, but his cloak is gone. And then you notice something strange. On the wall above the workbench, a map. Not a painted one, but a crude sketch carved directly into the wood. Lines, circles, and an unfamiliar mark, almost like a three-pronged fork. Why would a potter have this? And why? Carved into the wall where it cannot be taken down. The air shifts and a faint scent of pine smoke drifts in through the open door. But no one in the village burns pine wood. It's too scarce here. Somewhere beyond the edge of the fields, a dim orange glow flares briefly, then disappears. The hall was warm, almost too warm for the season, as if the fire in the stone hearth had been stoked far longer than needed. Shadows leaned across the walls in strange shapes, stretching toward the long table where platters of roasted game and bowls of spiced wine stood untouched. At first you thought the feast was waiting for a signal to begin. Yet no one moved. The lords sat in their carved chairs, eyes fixed somewhere beyond you, their lips pressed into unreadable lines. Servants lined the walls like painted figures, hands clasped, shoulders stiff. The only sound was the slow crackle of the logs and the faint drip of wax from a candle beside you. Why had they brought you here? You felt the weight of the seat beneath you fur-covered, softer than the rough benches you knew, and the cold realization that no one had asked you to eat. A silver cup stood at your place, filled to the brim with a deep, dark liquid that shimmered oddly in the firelight. From the head of the table, the old man with the braided white beard raised his hand, not to welcome, not to bless the food, but as though silencing a room that had never spoken. The fire hissed. You noticed then that the windows were covered heavy woolen cloth nailed over the frames, shutting out whatever lay beyond the walls. And though the hall was full of people, you felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched from somewhere far closer than the far end of the table. A log shifted in the hearth, sending sparks up into the chimney, and the old man's voice came low and steady. You came here on the last night of the old year. That is not a small thing. The others did not turn their heads. They kept staring at nothing, as though whatever answer you gave might change the air they breathed. You glanced at the cup before you. The liquid barely moved. You couldn't take your eyes from the wool-draped window nearest your seat. The fabric hung heavy, seams puckered where it had been nailed into the wooden frame. Not hastily, but with the kind of care you'd expect for something meant to stay for years. The old man's gaze didn't leave you. "You'll want a drink," he said softly, "before the sound begins." The others remained perfectly still, their profiles etched gold by the firelight. You lifted the cup. The scent rose, not wine, not ale, something warmer, thicker, spiced with herbs you could not name. It didn't just smell familiar, it felt familiar, like a half-remembered winter night from your childhood. You did not drink. The fire's crackle deepened, and from somewhere beyond the covered window came a sound faint at first, almost like wind through bare branches. But it wasn't wind, it was rhythmic, too measured, as though many people were walking in step. The old man's hand trembled only once as he reached for his own cup. "Do not look outside," he murmured. "It will only follow you back in." The footsteps grew louder, slow, deliberate. The hall seemed to lean toward the sound. You stood before you realized it, the cup abandoned, your hand brushing against the wool curtain. It was warm, far warmer than the air in the room. Something moved behind it. A voice, not a human voice, whispered your name in a way no stranger could have known. You pulled the curtain aside. The world outside was blanketed in a deep, unbroken snow. Under the moon's thin light, rows of figures stood shoulder to shoulder, stretching beyond the reach of sight. They were all you. Every face, every stance, every flicker of breath a perfect reflection. And each one was smiling. You didn't move. The snow didn't stir. A single reflection stepped forward, boots sinking into the white without sound. Its eyes met yours not in curiosity, not in malice, but in recognition, as though it had been waiting for this moment far longer than you had been alive. The old man's voice came faintly behind you. "It's time to choose." The reflection tilted its head, smiling wider. You saw now the line of its jaw was sharper, the shoulders straighter, the eyes brighter. It was you, but better. Or perhaps the you that never faltered, never doubted, never aged. They can only take one, the old man said. One stays, one leaves. The firelight at your back felt weaker, as though the hearth itself held its breath. You thought of the faces around the table, of their silence, their stillness, of how none had touched the wool-covered windows. You understood then. They were not strangers. They were those who had chosen to stay. Your reflection held out a gloved hand. The snow seemed to hush even more. You stepped forward. The warmth of its fingers was identical to your own, the same pulse beneath the skin. You felt the pull, gentle but inevitable. And then you were standing in the snow, looking back through the window, watching your other self turn toward the fire. Take your seat, lift the cup, and smile as though nothing had changed. Inside, the old man met your gaze through the glass. He didn't look sad, only relieved. The wool curtain fell back into place. The moonlight dimmed. And behind you, in the endless snow, countless other reflections waited, each smiling, each patient, each knowing exactly how long you'd be here. The moonlight thinned, as though the sky had drawn a veil. You stood in the white expanse, breath turning to frost, your reflection's warmth fading from your fingertips. The stillness pressed against you. Not silence, not truly. There was something beneath it. A hum, low, steady, older than the cabin, older than the snow, older than anything human. It wasn't coming from the trees. It wasn't coming from the wind. It was coming from below. You glanced down. The snow at your boots shimmered faintly, as though lit from a deep distance. Shapes moved their pale figures, slow and fluid, as if walking upward toward the surface. They wore your face, and hers, and his, and theirs. Everyone who had ever stepped into that cabin. The old man's voice reached you again, though the windows were hidden behind wool. It's not the cold that keeps them, he said. It's the sound. Once you hear it, you belong to it. The humming deepened. You felt your heartbeat adjust to its rhythm, matching it perfectly, as though it had been there all along, waiting for you to remember. And then you understood. The people inside weren't trapped. They were keeping the hum from growing louder. They were the barrier. And now, so were you. The snow closed over the shimmer. The sound sank deeper. And you waited as countless footsteps, soft, familiar, began approaching through the endless white. And so, dear friend, the night has carried us a long way. We have wandered together through snow-dusted paths, paused before frozen windows, and listened to voices that have whispered across years, perhaps centuries. We have sat by an old cabin's hearth, felt the warmth brush against our skin, and peered out at a world wrapped in frost and quiet mystery. You have walked steadily through each moment, listening, imagining, breathing, letting the rhythm of the story carry you like a slow-moving stream under a pale winter moon. And now here we are at the quiet place where the path ends. The lantern light is dimming. The last curls of smoke from the fire rise in the still air, and the wind outside no longer presses against the walls, but simply drifts, a soft companion to the silence. It is time to rest. You have done enough for today. The hours behind you are complete. The weight you've been carrying, whether heavy or light, can be set down now, gently, like placing a folded blanket upon a chair. Nothing more is required of you. Nothing is urgent. Nothing is waiting that cannot wait until morning. Breathe in, slowly. Let the cool, fresh air fill your lungs. And as you breathe out, feel your body loosen. Your shoulders drop. The muscles in your jaw release. The space between your brows smooths. Even your hands, even your feet seem to sigh in relief. You have given your attention to this story, and in return, the story has given you its company. Every image you saw, every sound you imagined, every shadow and flicker of light, they all belong to you now, tucked quietly into your mind. Some may fade by morning. Some may linger like a dream you're certain you've had before. But right now, in this moment, you don't need to hold on to any of it. Let it go. Let the cabin fade into the snow. Let the footsteps grow quieter. Let the humming settle deep into the earth where it belongs. All that remains is peace. The kind of peace that belongs to the last hour of night, when the world is utterly still, and your thoughts, once scattered and restless, begin to drift like snowflakes, falling into place one by one, until they cover everything in soft white. Tonight you are safe. You are warm. You are exactly where you need to be. The bed beneath you is your hearth. The blankets are your walls, and the air around you is quiet and kind, holding you gently as the minutes pass. As your eyes grow heavier, you might notice how the edges of your thoughts blur. Images melt into one another. A memory becomes a dream becomes a feeling, and that feeling becomes nothing but softness, weightlessness, calm. The night does not hurry you. Sleep will arrive in its own time. For the next 30 minutes, a soft, steady music will play a simple, quiet melody without sharp edges, without urgency. It will be there for you the way a friend sits beside you without speaking, simply sharing the silence. Let it wash over you. If your mind begins to wander, let it go wherever it wishes. If it circles back to pieces of the story, the cabin, the snow, the hum beneath the earth, let it. They are gentle now, harmless, like old photographs left in the attic. The music will hold you in this space where you can rest without thinking, where you can breathe without effort, where you can drift deeper and deeper into the velvet dark. And as you go, know this. No matter how far the story took you tonight, no matter the twists or mysteries, you are always free to step away when the tale is told. Your waking world is waiting for you, but not now. Now belongs to your rest. Now belongs to the slow pull of sleep. The snow outside is endless, but it is quiet. The cabin's door is closed, but the fire's warmth lingers in the walls. And you are already halfway to dreams. Thank you for walking this path with me tonight. Thank you for letting your imagination wander alongside mine, for giving your time to this story, for allowing the words to be a bridge between us across distance, across hours, across the strange, winding forest of thought. I hope the night ahead is gentle to you. I hope your dreams are calm, and your waking tomorrow feels like sunlight spilling slowly into a room. I hope you carry the quiet with you, even when the day begins again. For now, close your eyes. Sink deeper into your pillow. Let your breath and the music become one slow, steady, even. You are safe here. You are warm here. And you are exactly where you belong. Good night, dear friend. Sleep well.